Today on Market Journal, as trade talks with China fail to improve, learn how Nebraska producers are being affected and what export opportunities are still available. Our analyst shares what he's tracking in the markets, hear why corn basis continues to remain hot, what's up with wheat, and how a recent change in the cattle market is nothing more than a chaos event. Plus, Husker Harvest Days is a rite of passage for any Nebraska farmer. See what's available at this year's show to improve your farming operation. This week's edition of Market Journal starts right now.
Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.
Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine.
Hello everyone, I'm Troy Moling and thanks for joining us today on Market Journal. We're starting off this week's broadcast talking about trade. And according to the American Farm Bureau, in 2017, China imported $19.5 billion of U.S. farm commodities, mainly soybeans, dairy, sorghum, and pork. In 2018, that number plummeted to $9.1 billion. And the downward trend is continuing into this year with an ongoing trade war giving other countries the chance to take the United States' place in filling those ag needs. Earlier this week, I spoke with UNL Agricultural Economics Professor Dr. Wes Peterson about where things stand right now with China and what trade opportunities are still available for producers.
This is fluid. It's a moving target. It changes all the time. Whatever I say at this point will probably be wrong in 3 days. So it's a very tough thing to keep up on. We started a trade war in 2018 with a lot of countries, but predominantly with China. And throughout 2018, the Trump administration continued to escalate the trade war and put on more tariffs. China retaliated by putting on 15% tariffs on most of the, quite a lot of U.S. agricultural imports. A few weeks ago, the Trump administration threatened to put on more tariffs beginning in September. And China, you know, whenever you get in a trade war, the other side's going to retaliate some way. So China did a couple of things. The first thing it did was it said that they were not going to buy any more agricultural goods. What happened subsequently was that Trump realized that this might hit a lot of toys at Christmas and stuff like that. And so he put off the tariff increase that was scheduled for September 1st to December. But I haven't seen the Chinese say that they're going to back off. So that's kind of the situation. We don't know whether China will go back into the market and start buying more agricultural goods because the tariffs have been put off, or whether they'll say, no, we're going to stick with our guns here. But whatever the case, in the first half of 2019, U.S. agricultural exports to China were down about 21% compared to the first half of 2018. The first half of 2018 was down very substantially compared to 2017 and 2016 and so on. So if they don't buy anything else the rest of this year, we will have, you know, as opposed to somewhere around 20 billion in agricultural exports that we used to do, we may only have 5 or 6 billion.
And a lot of this, we always hear about soybean producers are the ones who are really taking it on the chin with this trade war. So could you give us a sense of how this is specifically impacting Nebraska agriculture and the Nebraska producer, not only in terms of soybeans, but other markets as well?
Yeah, one of the things that makes all of this stuff very, very complicated is that there's a trade war with tariffs and so on and so forth that has an impact, but there are other things going on, as we all know. If China does not buy any more soybeans from the U.S., well, that adds on. I mean, it goes in the other direction. It would be price depressing, whereas if you have a shortage in supply, that would increase the prices. So how those two things will weigh out will be significant. But of course, even if your prices have gone up because of a shortfall due to the weather, if you don't have any soybeans to sell, then you know that doesn't make any difference for you, right? So,
right.
I think think that there's a lot of uncertainty, and the China problem just adds to that uncertainty.
Okay, so I don't know that Donald Trump watches this show. If he doesn't, he should. But I don't know if he does. But in the off chance he is watching, if you had Donald Trump's ear, what would you tell him?
Well, I think I'm a trade economist. I believe in free markets and free trade and so on and so forth. I would tell him that the idea that you can win a trade war is wrong. It's incorrect. Everybody loses from a trade war, as we are seeing at this stage. It's very interesting to note that since the trade war started, our overall trade deficit has gotten bigger. Our trade deficit with China has gotten bigger, so it's doing exactly the opposite of what he says he thinks it would be doing. So I would say, stop the trade war would be the first thing that you should do. The second thing would be to go back and contact the countries that the other partners that we had in the Trans-Pacific Partnership. All of the others have gone ahead and made an agreement, and they are going forward with a trade agreement among those absent the United States. We ought to go to them hat in hand and ask them to let us back in on that, because that would have done a whole lot for our beef exports, for example, because it would have opened up the Japanese market quite substantially.
So if we take China out of the equation, what are some export opportunities for Nebraska producers currently or down the road?
Well, there are, I think, a lot of others. Again, one of the things that would have been useful to do would be to be in something like the Trans-Pacific Partnership, where we could have perhaps, that included Vietnam. Vietnam is likely going to be an interesting market. The TPP did not include Indonesia, I believe. Indonesia is the fourth largest country in the world. They consume huge amounts of soybeans as tofu, right? They don't feed livestock all that much, and they certainly don't eat pork because they're a Muslim country. So maybe edible markets, edible soybean markets would be something that could be. That's probably a little bit longer term. Short term, I think Brazil will be selling more soybeans to China. We'll be selling less.
Yeah.
But that means that Brazil will be selling fewer soybeans to other countries where it used to trade, so that opens up some possible markets there for the United States as well. And I'm not sure exactly what those are, but I think Asia is sort of the biggest actor. Japan, South Korea, Indonesia, Vietnam, Thailand. These are growing economies, and they've got lots and lots of people.
We've got the full interview with Wes posted on our YouTube and social media channels. And we're going to continue this discussion for a couple more minutes with our market analyst, Darin Newsom. Good to see you this week.
Thanks for having me back, Troy.
So we just saw the interview with Wes. Now I want to get your take. What are some things you're watching internationally and on the trade front?
Okay, probably the biggest things internationally, it is the trade front. All of the problems that the United States is having right now, getting anything moved. So what I'm really keeping an eye on here as we're closing out the 2018-19 marketing year is our export shipments, and they've been horrible in corn. I mean, we're falling. We could come in 100 million bushels below what's projected right now, and so that could add to our ending stocks number. Not only just in the September report, but when we get around to the quarterly stocks numbers at the end of September. The other thing is in soybeans, where we've actually seen some export demand picking up, but we just, we still have this trade war going on. There's really nothing new on that front. U.S. dollar has been firm. Brazil real has been weak. None of these things are really providing any support to the U.S. markets. The same things that I've been keeping an eye on, probably going to continue.
And we've also been reading about an impending recession. Do you see any warning signs of that happening, or what does that mean for ag?
The great thing about the recession is if you were to put 12 economists in a room, not only would you get 13 different opinions on whether or not we're in a recession, no one would even agree on the definition or the metrics of the recession. So I'm going to stay out of that argument. But as I look at the ag, we are in a recession. And I don't have any economic definition for it, but we are in a recession for ag, and I really don't see us getting out of it anytime soon. The problem is we still have too much supply to meet demand. If we start to strengthen our demand again, that could start to firm prices, maybe help ag industry out as a whole. Again, I just don't see it happening anytime soon.
So as we're getting close to Labor Day, before you know it's going to be harvest time. What are some of the big stories that you're tracking right now?
You know, the big stories that I'm tracking aren't what everybody else is looking at. I don't care about yield. I don't care about tours. I don't care about all of these things.
You don't care about crop conditions, you
I
said.
do not care about crop conditions. One of the things I'm known for is calling that the Kardashians of USDA reports. I do not care about any of that stuff. What I'm looking at is the future spreads and forward curves, and that's telling me a completely different story than what everybody else wants to hear. We've got strong carry going in both corn and soybeans heading into, hopefully, harvest at some point. And this is telling me the commercial side is getting very comfortable with the supply and demand situation. That doesn't tell me anything about supply. Could be speaking about just as much about demand. So whatever the case, it's not as bullish as what everyone wants to believe. Could we have small crops? Absolutely. Does it matter right now? No, because we're looking at an overall supply-demand situation that's growing a little more bearish as we go along.
And we had an analyst on a few weeks ago. He talked about corn basis being really hot. What has been basis doing lately as we get further into the season?
Corn basis has stayed strong. Well past its normal seasonal peak. And it's very interesting because we could be looking at 2.4 billion bushels of ending stocks coming out of one year, becoming beginning stocks for the next at the end of this month. And normally you wouldn't expect a strong basis to be played along with that. But what's happening, what it looks like to me, is that we've got some hoarding going on. All those areas in the eastern corn belt where they couldn't get planted or the crop's just not going to be there, they're using, it looks like they're planning on using some of the 2018 bushels to replace what's been lost in 2019. So the plan is they're going to spread those out over the next marketing year, keeping those bushels off the market here in front of what's normally a harvest, where we start to see a harvest sell-off in basis. That's not happening. I think it's because those bushels are being held back. We don't have great demand right now, but just the fact that these bushels aren't making it into the market is helping to keep basis supported.
And looking at wheat, I know there were some things you wanted to hit on as far as that goes too.
You know, the wheat market is I guess, interesting in a way, in that seasonally this is the time of year it just collapses, and that's exactly what we're seeing. We tried to see some buying come back in here and there, but it's never enough, and so we're seeing it getting fundamentally weaker. We're seeing basis levels start to slip again. There's a lot of wheat out there, and the fact is, even though that we had this heat wave hit Europe and supposedly it was going to help the U.S. situation, we just haven't seen more bushels called for from the United States. The demand for our supplies hasn't picked up. So we're starting to see the market sag again. The possibility, I've heard from a friend that he received a letter from USDA FSA in his area up in northwest Minnesota that they could be facing LDP situations again for spring wheat. That's a horrible thought. And if not for the weather, we'd probably be facing a similar situation in corn and beans. We'd probably be facing LDP situations. So wheat is just ugly market right now, and seasonally it just doesn't look like it's going to get better for a month or two.
And quick question about cattle. Last week's show we mentioned that fire at the Tyson plant in Kansas. So as a reminder, everybody, this plant responsible for about 5% of the weekly cattle industry's slaughter. So is the market still a little bit uneasy from this, or everything settled down pretty quick?
From a market point of view, it looks like it's settled down, but the most interesting thing to me was that this was a pure chaos event. In other words, an event that brings to mind chaos theory, this unforeseen event that changes the direction and changes where we wind up. We have to redraw everything we thought we knew about fundamentals and technicals and start over, and that's what we've done this week. We've seen the market stabilize. We've seen both live cattle and feeder cattle stabilize, but we're stabilizing at much lower prices. Where we go from here, you would think we would be able to rally at this point, but we've got to see the commercial buying, and we're towards the end of grilling season, so it may be too late for a great deal of commercial buying to come in and support this market.
And Darin, before we let you go, any other marketing or risk management tips that you want to leave us with today?
You know, we've got this new, we've got the CME's revised storage rates in corn and soybeans heading into this new marketing year, 8 cents per bushels per month. And so again, it's changed the way that we have to read the forward curves and the cost of carry. Right now, in soybeans, we're still hanging around that 50% coverage in that Nov to July timeframe. If we were to use the old metrics of 5 cents per bushel per month, we'd be well beyond 70%. So it's still bearish. The old metrics would be extremely bearish. Right now, we're neutral bearish. So if we've got some November hedges on or some prices in place, and if we've got some December and we don't really want to move it this year, we might be looking at these spreads right now as opportunities to roll these hedges out. So that there's not much else to do right now except to look at these spreads. If I've got some hedge to arise, if I've got some hedges, you may want to look at these spreads to see if there's something attractive on out in the future.
Thanks to Darin for being on the show. It's time for this week's trivia question, and as we've mentioned before on the show, Nebraska is a top producer for popcorn. So we want to know, how many pounds of popcorn does the state produce annually? Is it 100 million, 225 million, 350 million, or is it 410 million? Take your best guess, and I'll have the answer after Al's forecast. And speaking of Al, it's time for weather with Nebraska Extension Ag Climatologist and Market Journal Chief Meteorologist Al Dutcher. And this week brought some fairly humid conditions. We even got some storms too. Al, how are we looking coming up?
Well, Troy, you're exactly right. We did see those very humid conditions through last week and into the early part of this week before we've seen a cold front move through the region and dramatically shift our temperatures from very warm to very cool. So we went from temperatures in the 90s on Tuesday with heat indices of 100 to 120 across the state to temperatures that were basically in the mid to upper 70s and basically your heat indices in the mid to upper 70s. So quite a dramatic change, something that we would typically see that strong of a change in the month of September and October. So a little early for that. More importantly, this cool air is a concern, and there's indications that we're going to see even more cool air move into our region over this next 7-day period. So by the time this is all said and done, what it looks like from a state perspective, Nebraska is going to come in plus or minus about 1 degree above or below normal, depending on location in the state for the month of August. More importantly, as we go to the upper air pattern, what we will notice is the trough is starting to move through the state. This started to impact western Nebraska last night, and it will pivot through central Nebraska this morning, and then exit in to eastern Nebraska this evening during the overnight hours. Low pressure in the Texas Panhandle is feeding Gulf moisture northward to keep this system active. It does look like it will fade out somewhat as it moves toward the east and then regenerate during the overnight hours, and you see this trough strengthens as it moves toward the southeast over central Missouri. So that will lead to low pressure formation all the way lined up from southwest Nebraska all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico, but the concentrated precipitation will remain across eastern Nebraska or eastern Kansas and possibly south central and southeast Nebraska. And then by Monday we start to see this trough digging, bringing in very cool air into our region. So Sunday is probably going to be our warmest day of the week, and then we see these low pressures at the surface, one in Texas, one over in Illinois, and one up in Minnesota. All of these will concentrate the precipitation well to the east of us, although northeast Nebraska may get a few scattered light showers. On Tuesday, the trough itself broadens out, spreads that cool air toward the east. Low pressure up in South Dakota really will not be a player much for Nebraska, as high pressure is going to be our primary focus. The winds will start turning around toward the south-southwest on the backside of this high pressure system as the main cool air kind of pivots toward the Great Lakes region. That may allow us to move back up to more normal temperatures midweek. As we see low pressure down in the Texas Panhandle, will start to pump moisture toward the north, but it doesn't have any focus mechanism to generate widespread precipitation here across Nebraska. An isolated thunderstorm is not out of the question central and western Nebraska, and this trough starts to deepen as we get into Thursday, bringing another round of cool air into much of the eastern two-thirds of the Corn Belt as high pressure settles in over the western Corn Belt. The main precipitation will remain to our southeast, and there is some isolated convection with the monsoon starting to flow up into the Rockies. And then we start to see this trough lift somewhat toward the Great Lakes, and a little bit warmer weather starts to build into our region under the influence of high pressure. Low pressure stands out in the north central Rockies. That will become a player as we go into the first few days of September, and monsoon flow starts to bring moisture up into the western part of the state for a few isolated thunderstorms. 8 to 14-day forecast keeps colder than normal conditions in play as that trough that's in the west starts to move into our region and brings a reinforcing shot of cold air, although this may pivot a little bit farther toward the east and not so much centered over Nebraska. And then the precipitation, monsoon moisture feeding northward with that trough, a good chance for precipitation across western Nebraska. So Troy, it looks like overall a fairly dry pattern as we get by this weekend.
Thanks, Al. Back to trivia now, and this week we asked, how many pounds of popcorn does Nebraska produce each year? The answer is C, 350 million. That's about 45% of the nation's supply. And 1 acre of popcorn will yield 50 to 100 bushels, depending on irrigation and production techniques. Next up, it may sound cliche, but it's a fact that water is integral to life. And there are a few programs in the state that are reaching out to get citizens more involved in water quality management and appreciation. Market Journal's Bill Dodd is taking a look at how you can help researchers with water data collection, or even just learn about the history and geography of waterways to cultivate a deeper respect for a resource we can't live without. Bill, what have you got for us this week?
Thanks, Troy. Since 1972, the Nebraska Water Center has been organizing water and natural resource tours, and at its inception, the tour primarily focused on irrigation and water management practices in Nebraska. Since then, Nebraska Water Center has organized a water and natural resources tour in many areas of the United States that are integral to our water needs and understanding of water management in Nebraska. Now the NWC is working with the Central Nebraska Public Power and Irrigation District, as well as the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources, among other businesses and organizations, to give a much-needed support for understanding and improving the region's resources. These tours are a fun and exciting method for disseminating information about water issues and finding solutions to any water-related challenges in our region. Tours of the past have included destinations such as the Rocky Mountains, New Mexico's Pasos River Basin, and California's Bay Delta. This year, the tour will be heading to Montana and giving attendees an opportunity to see Yellowstone National Park. According to organizer Jeff Butner, these locations are selected for their unique similarities to our own water needs and management practices here in Nebraska.
But there were multiple factors in selecting this location. The flooding topic again, for instance, the Musselshell River, which is a tributary of the Missouri, has experienced 2 or 3 100-year floods within the last decade. And that sounds unusual, but given the fact that Nebraska has been right in the crosshairs of flood events this year, of course, we didn't know when we selected this destination, but as it turns out, it was kind of appropriate. But they've got wildlife conservation efforts and water management issues that we can compare and contrast with the way Nebraska is handling these same issues.
When I talked to Jeff last week, there were still a couple of spots available. The tour is scheduled for September 15th through the 19th. And if you're interested and would like to learn more, you can visit cnppid.com/summer tour. If water management and data collection a bit closer to home is more your speed, then you may have to look no further than your own backyard. University of Nebraska environmental engineer Shannon Bartelt Hunt is heading up the Water Quality plus Citizen Science program, and this year the project will focus on drinking water quality. In 2018, citizen scientists produced 400 water quality samples from the Elkhorn and Lower Platte River basins. This project uses rapid test strips to detect commercial fertilizer nutrients in groundwater and surface waters around agricultural communities. While these nutrients promote crop growth, high levels can compromise water quality and citizen health.
So one of the parameters we're looking at, which is phosphate, can lead to algae blooms in waters, and those algae blooms can potentially can be toxic, and so there could be human health effects from that. There's also human health effects from nitrate in excess quantities. So for about a month, starting August 26th, we'll be sending out the test kits in the mail. You'll receive your kit. You can use it to test your water quality. You'll get the data right there. You'll find out the quality of the water that you're testing. And then we just ask that you mail your results back to us in a prepaid envelope so that we can compile all the data together.
If this is a program you'd like to be involved in, you can find more information and sign up to be a citizen water tester at go.unl.edu/WQCS. And while we're on the subject of water management, we'd like to take this opportunity to give our viewers an update on the Irrigation Canal tunnel collapse that's been affecting parts of Wyoming and the Nebraska Panhandle. Crews are still working around the clock to get much-needed irrigation water to local producers. It's been over a month since the tunnel collapsed, and so far things seem to be on track for getting a temporary fix in place before the end of the growing season. While things seem to be on track as far as repairs are concerned, Nebraska Extension Educator Jessica Groskopf says there's still some challenging aspects facing repair crews.
And now we're working on a much larger collapse site within the tunnel, and it's a difficult place to work. So part of the problem is that there's a lot of dirt and debris above ground, and they have to place what are called trench boxes above the tunnel in order to keep that earth from moving back into the tunnel, and then they will be able to repair the much larger second hole. We know that that hole is about 8 foot in width, but we don't know how long that hole is, and so that's a challenge that they will have to work with as they move forward.
If you're looking for more information and resources, you can get updates at extension.unl.edu/statewide/panhandle/canal-break, or contact the Nebraska Rural Resources Hotline at 0258. Troy, that's what I've got my eye on this week. We'll send it back to you.
Thanks, Bill. We've also got those links that Bill mentioned on the Market Journal website, so be sure and check those out. Ending our broadcast today, and Husker Harvest Days is just over 2 weeks away. This is a huge event for farmers across the state. It's been going on for over 40 years and gives producers a look at the latest equipment, supplies, and technology in farming today. The University of Nebraska always has a big presence, and this year, Nebraska Extension is stepping up their efforts by highlighting big ideas in agriculture. Extension's Ron Seymour says dozens of educators and specialists will be giving the talks, answering questions, and continuing to strengthen Nebraska's ag industry.
We're providing information that will help the farm family and help them with their bottom line, either through economics, through leadership, through specific techniques that they can use. Like, we have folks that are doing cropping systems, but they're talking about cover crops and how do you use those and how do you make those work best. And then we have some folks that are there talking about irrigation and irrigation efficiency. And one of the big themes is being weather ready. And what can you do on your farm to make sure that you are ready, and how are you ready to, if we have a big weather event like we had this past spring come through Nebraska, and we just have to be ready for those kinds of things. And so we have some folks from our community environment horticulture group, as well as some folks that are there to help talk about family stresses and things that people are facing, and where do you find information and how do you do better. And then I failed to mention about the beef folks that are there. They're going to talk about calving and the importance of colostrum and things that help those folks. So we have a lot for a lot of farming activities. If the farmer's doing it, hopefully we'll have something there for them.
Husker Harvest Days will be September 10th, 11th, and 12th in Grand Island. We've got more information on the Market Journal website. And hey, we got to mention this. Market Journal will be there with a booth of our own, so come on by, say hello, and play a game to win some prizes. That's going to do it for this week's show. If you missed a story, be sure to download the Market Journal mobile app or follow us on social media to join in on the conversation. Next week, we'll talk with USDA Ag Secretary Sonny Perdue about his recent visit to Nebraska, and Luke Beckman will be our market analyst. That and a whole lot more. Hope to see you right back here next time. I'm Troy Moling. Thanks for watching.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.